Welcome to Nostalgia Alley. We have a very special program. We have Robert Max, an American Jewish soldier, fought in 3 major battle campaigns across Europe in World War II, captured during the climactic Battle of the Bulge. He was forced into slave labor without winter garments in 0 temperatures. He was starved, brutalized, and had absolutely no shelter. Robert contracted many illnesses and ultimately escaped from this horrible atrocity. Robert, it's very, very rare we have a true American hero in our program. I want to thank you for your service and for really enabling me to sit here now as a free person. Robert, when did it all start? It started basically in the Battle of the Bulge for you?
Yeah, I fought in 3 major campaigns across France. The third one was called the Ardennes Campaign because it was fought in the Ardennes forest. It was later named the Battle of the Bulge. We had been driving rapidly. I was in George Patton's 3rd Army, 6th Armored Division. We and other units in the American forces had been driving the Germans rapidly across France. Came the final point in which their backs were to the wall, and that began in southwestern Belgium. Came to be known, the Germans struck back with unrelenting force. Was later called the Battle of the Bulge. And why did they call it the Battle of the Bulge? Because the German forces, their strategy was to congeal their forces into one huge forge, the American and British lines running north to south, miles of troops. But they created the bulge, broke through, and created utter confusion among the Allied American and British forces. The unit, the company that I had trained with in the United States, the 106th Infantry Division, lost 75% of its troops in that first day. Killed, wow. Wounded, captured, 75%. And I knew many of the people whose lives were lost. I had been on the line for 3 days, and I was ordered to go back behind the lines, get some food and some rest. On the way back, I heard a call for volunteers, and something instinctively within me urged me to do that, and I did. And I learned that the mission was to find out where the Allied and the enemy lines were. Commanders had to know that, had to know positions to plan strategy. I volunteered. I saw a Jeep in the distance, and I commandeered the Jeep. I waved to others. 5 others joined me. We hopped into a Jeep. We were heading to who knows where. It was very misty. I recall the mist. Dusk was beginning to settle in. So we took off, heading for where we believed were the battle lines. We rounded a curve in the road, and suddenly, about 10 to 15 yards in front of us, I see this 88mm cannon mounted on a tank-like German vehicle, and it's pointed right at us. For a long time afterward, I wondered why in the world nobody in that tank fired on us. They would have killed us, of course, and that would have been the end of it. Just at that time, small arms fire pours in upon us from our right, machine gun, rifle fire. We don't know where it's coming from. We don't know who's sending it out, but we knew we needed shelter. We had to have some place to defend ourselves. There was a shack across the road, one of the men unfastened the machine gun, had the vision to do that, and brought it with us. We hopped into the shack. One of the men was hit in the back and killed on the way over. So there were 5 of us left. Enemy fire still pouring in on us. We set up the machine gun, and within a couple of minutes, the machine gunner was killed. I did what very often happened on the battlefield. You operate instinctively, battle readiness. And I did what most anybody would have done, is an empty machine gun. So our only defense, rifles, weren't doing us a lot of good. So I just, again, instinctively hopped in front of that, or behind that machine gun, and started firing at everything I saw, heads bobbing and so forth across the road. I probably killed many. We sustained ourselves through the day. That was reasonably early in the morning. We were somehow able to hold out with some rifle fire and machine gun fire through the day. Dusk starts to settle in, and then finally a chilling feeling. I hear put on my machine gun, and we're out of ammunition. We have nothing to defend ourselves with. We don't know what the enemy is yet. I see in the floor of this shack a cover. If there's a cover in the floor, there must be something. There must be a cellar below. The strategy, very, very simple. I said, we'll take those of us who remain. And I think there were 2 able-bodied and 2 wounded. I said, we'll descend into the cellar. When darkness descends, we will come out, and we will try to infiltrate through enemy lines and get back to Allied forces. It didn't turn out that way. Sometime afterward, could have been a half hour, somewhere between an hour, a half hour probably, and an hour, there's a tapping on this cellar door. And I push it up. And the sight that I saw, what I saw at that point remains vivid in my mind now, 70 years later. And that's what happens. Some things you forget, some things you want to forget, some you barely remember, and some are stick in your mind for the rest of your life. This was one of them. There was a ring of 8 automatic guns, all pointed down at my face. Behind each gun, trigger finger ready, was a German soldier in white camouflage to correspond with the snow outside. And the contrast of the black against the white was stark. And the emotion came up. The others were taken away by some soldiers. The sergeant who was in charge of the group took charge of me, put his rifle barrel into my back, pushed me out of the shack across the road. And then I saw what we had been fighting all day, row upon row of bunkers with German soldiers and machine guns on each one. I don't know how we survived what we did, but we were able to do that. Just at that point, American or British, and to this day I do not know which it was, but Allied artillery starts to pour in. We had called for it early in the morning to help us out, and now came in. And it was the battle was called the Battle of the Ardennes, because it was an Ardennes forest, and so there were trees. The shells were blasting in the trees, and shrapnel was landing all around me. This German sergeant who took charge of me climbs into his bunker. He has some protection. I have none. I try to climb into that bunker with him. Nine. He would not let me. We start to talk, and to my great good luck, he speaks English, unlike probably almost every other German soldier in the area. He speaks English. I ask him, "What are you going to do with me?" And he looks up at me, he says, "I have to kill you." That was the order that had been issued by High Command at that late stage in the war. They were not taking any American prisoners, I guess British too, no prisoners alive. Conversation, at that point, when he says, I have to kill you, I was a sprinter in school, and I was determined I was going to make a break for it. I had a good start. The only problem was we had a burning tank in a nearby field, British or American, I don't know. But it was burning, and the road was lit up. And I could see the silhouettes as all the way, the bunkers all the way down that road. And I saw what was a machine gun and what was a helmet. Obviously, that was not going to work out. There was no way that I could run all around me. There were other bunkers, guards, and regular militia. The only thing I had left was conversation. And I was fortunate again, blessed, that this man spoke English. He said, why are you Americans here? This is not your war. Now remember that shells are blasting and shrapnel's coming around me. And somehow you sort of build some kind of protection around you. I just discounted that and started to talk with him. And we're carrying on a debate. I said, you made it our war. And the conversation goes on. His voice becomes less harsh as we go on and on. And at one point, I see a change in, I can barely see his face. Mostly I could just see his helmet. But if I bend my head a little bit and I try to see his face. And the stark look on it seems to be changing. My view was that somewhere in our discussion, this German sergeant looked at me and said, this is a soldier. We greatly outnumbered them. I learned later on that what started out to be 6 of us were fighting against between 100 and 150 Germans, most of whom were in bunkers. The odds were not great for us. I suspected, that's as far as it went, I suspected, though, that he looked up at me, and this was a soldier that respected valor. And he says to me in English, he says, you fought well today. You killed many of our men, but you fought well. And so that told me there's some possibility. Maybe I will not be killed immediately. The conversation goes on, and then he reaches down into his pocket. And he had told me earlier that I have to kill you, or we have to kill you. And I figure he's a non-commissioned officer. Our non-coms were able to carry a pistol also. I figure he's going to pull out a pistol, and that will be it. Instead, this German sergeant pulls out his wallet. We're a battlefield. There's shells still landing all around, shrapnel landing near us. I could be dead any moment. And somehow you develop a stabilizing force, something, I don't know how I was able to do it, but you do that, and it's not terribly uncommon in combat. He shows me a picture of his family. He's a good Nazi. He says, next year, I'm going to take them to your big city. I said, you mean New York City? Yeah. I wanted to tell him, no way. Yeah. And, but he's looking at my face, and he's looking back at the pictures. At this point, I'm 21 years old. His son looks like he's in his late teens. And I always had the suspicion that he kept looking down and up, and somewhere along the line, it occurred to him, oh my gosh, this is a boy, a boy. And he's not much different than my own son. His son had blonde hair, blue eyes. He looked up at me, down, up. I have blue eyes, I have light brown hair.
There's that connection.
He believed.
Anyway, I got to take a break.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Please. We're going to take a public service announcement. I'm going to be right back with Robert Max, a true American hero.
I call you and say, I'm with the IRS. You owe back taxes, and if you don't pay today, you're going to jail. You can fix this by sending cash. Did you actually believe me? Too smart to fall for it? Well, last year, Americans paid $100 million to guys like me. 1 in 6 people were scammed. Can you believe it? Well, you shouldn't. I just made that up, too. You are a little gullible.
And we are back with Robert Max. Robert, when he took out that wallet, there was that connection. You knew that probably your life was going to be saved. But
Yes.
that was just the introduction to some pretty harsh things that
Yes.
you had to face.
Yes. How did I get to those harsh things? He looks up at me after looking at the pictures. He says, "For you, the war is over." And I figured, well, now he's really going to take out the pistol and do it. He says, "I'm going to send you to a prisoner of war camp." He knew. He knew that in a prisoner of war camp, I would have shelter, I would have food, I would be cared, I would have heat, and so forth. Called over 2 guards. They took me away, and we started a march. Now it's getting near dusk. Along the road, and I go through all mental, emotional aberrations. I can't tell. Am I really going to go to? Don't know. Along the way, an officer, a German officer, stops these 2 guards, calls them over. After that discussion, we changed direction. The officer, I assumed, countermanded the sergeant's orders. We went in a different direction. An hour or so later, we end up, and all of a sudden, I see huge numbers of military soldiers in dark uniforms, very, very different from ours. As I discovered later on, most of them were from the Soviet Union. When Hitler declared war in 1941 against the Soviet Union, he captured many. They were there. I was thrown into this mass of people. Had no idea what was going to happen to me at this point. What happened to the prisoner of war camp? At any rate, Germans, the guards, loads and loads of guards around. And the only way to stay alive was to obey the guards because they would shoot. I'm not supposed to be alive anyway. They weren't taking prisoners. At any rate, lie down. Before they lie down, one guard comes, a German guard comes over, holds my shoulders. The other takes my winter coat. They strip me of my winter coat and gloves. The temperatures at that time, record lows in Germany. They hovered between 0 and 5 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
They line us up, forced march. Nightfall descends, and we're ordered to lie down with the rifles. German language, most of which I couldn't understand, but the rifle barrels were the signal, lie down. Not next to one another, but in succession. We lie down. We're on a road. The road is covered with ice and snow. We're told to lie down. And that's what we do. That's where we're going to sleep. No coat, no gloves. For the next 82 out of 90 nights, that's where I sleep. I had to keep fingers and toes moving constantly. There was very little room or opportunity for sleep. What sustained me emotionally, and the emotions were, in some instances, worse even than the physical. And so I couldn't sleep. What I started to think about was food. And I was always under the impression, if you're hungry, don't think about food. I did. I had visions. You know, it's dark night, and the visions before my eyes were of foods. I remember my mother's favorite foods. And I thought about those. I could feel them, I could taste them, I could smell them. They became very, very real. And that sustained me emotionally during that period, the months that we spent on ice like that. Many months later in the hospital, a nurse brought me a little book and I recorded. There were 84 foods that I was miraculously able to remember in my hospital bed and all that. So I recorded. They're on exhibit right now in an exhibition at our Jewish Federation, along with my battle jacket, my army uniform and the medals, etc. So I recorded those. We went on. This continued for a couple of months. Our responsibility was to rebuild the railroads that were bombed by our troops. It was backbreaking work. The rails were torn up. We had to repair them so that their trains could carry materials, war material, to their troops. Well, these were our enemies. We were determined we were not going to give them railroads in a form that the trains would be able to pass. So we sabotaged. Fortunately, they were among our prisoners. I don't remember if they were Americans or Russians or from other countries, but somehow there were people who knew how to make the rails look as though they were attached. They didn't put in pins. The rails weren't exactly lined up. The inspectors were the German guards. They didn't know enough to be able to distinguish between perfectly aligned and misaligned. The only happy moments we had, pleasant moments I should say, that we had was the realization that we had sabotaged their railroads. Any train going over those tracks would have crashed. So we were pulled out from one place to another. At night, we had to carry the railroad tracks from one town to another. They had to get usable tracks. Putting those on our shoulder, mind you now, we've been going without food. Just a little crust of brown bread in the morning, that was it. I had all bones on my shoulder, but we had to carry those. And that was the work that we did for them. It went on and on. How I feared that I was dying. I was being starved, getting virtually no food. And the bones were emerging. And I knew, it didn't take much really thinking to realize that if you don't get any food, you're going to die of malnutrition. And if it isn't malnutrition, you'll die from exposure. Because again, those temperatures, 0 to 5 degrees, and no clothing to protect ourselves. And so that's how we went on, week after week, month after month. Now it's months later. Tide of battle has turned. The Germans now are on the defensive. The Allied forces are coming through. They have to move us faster. They're boxcars, cattle cars, the same cars that took people, Jews mostly, to the concentration camps. And we were thrown into those cars, forced into the cars. That rifle barrels, again, our backs, kept pushing us into those cattle cars. They were designed to hold 40 humans sitting. We were somewhere between 75 and 80. The bodies were stuffed, piled on one another. I remember some tried to get a place to sit down, and other bodies came tumbling over. Once a day, there was no lights, no windows. Once a day, the big door would swing open. They'd throw in some crusts of breads. We were too weak to attack one another by that time. Malnutrition really set in for all of us. But some were able to crawl to the bread. I know I tried crawling. Anybody who got a few scraps of bread just threw it into his mouth. We had become a pack of animals, really. There was no sharing of anything. In that car, we had no toilet facilities. We had to use our helmets. Some men really went out of their minds, and others died. So we had death. We had these helmets. The air was putrid. So this went on for 6 days and nights. After that time, let's say we left some dead bodies there. They pulled us out, put us into a forced march. My right foot had swelled so much that I had to discard. Fortunately, they stopped us somewhere along the way. I discarded my right shoe. The only winter garment I had left was a scarf. I wrapped a scarf around the foot. And that was all that I had against snow and ice. I was determined at that point. I knew there's only one way I'll come out alive, and that's by escape. How am I going to escape? We're put in lines, ready, again, a forced march. And I figured, no great brilliant strategy. It was very simple. I could see where the guards were positioned on the right and on the left. And if we came to a certain curve in the road, I knew that we could be invisible to the guards for a certain period. We did get to that. There were 2 other American soldiers nearby, and I motioned to them. When I nod my head, we're going to take off, and we did. We threw ourselves over a hedgerow. I assumed later on that the American forces closed ranks. If they hadn't, and the guards saw the emptiness, they would have come back. Nobody came back for us. We crawled back into a little town that the train had passed through earlier. It was called Reichenbach, Germany. A pleasant little village. As we crawled, I was crawling a good part of the time because I couldn't walk anymore. We were crawling toward the town, and I hear the sounds that I heard on the battlefield. And it turns, and we get closer, and I see German tanks, and I see German soldiers. We had escaped to a staging area. If seen, we'd be shot on the spot. So we had to crawl through back alleys. I saw a house in the distance, nice little cottages like, and this one was white. And I said to the other 2 guys, this is a safe house. How do you know? I don't know how I knew, instinct, whatever it was. We approach that house, knock on the door. An elderly couple comes to the door. The little man, he looks at my jacket. That's all I had in my car. I didn't have just a thin jacket. He sees the U.S. emblem. He smiles. He motions us in. He comes out, checks. There's no guards around. They take a chance. Their lives are at stake. If they are caught with us in the house, they'll be shot as traitors. They tell us where to hide out. They give us some food. We looked like we needed food. They told us where to hide out in a barn nearby. We stayed there for what amounted to maybe 2 to 3 days, and eventually, I'm peering through a little knothole down an alleyway. I see some helmets go by. They're not German helmets. Well, what else can they be? They look like our helmets. I'm still not sure, so I don't tell the other 2 guys yet that I think we may be there, back to American troops. And a couple minutes later, a vehicle goes by. Looks familiar. It's a Jeep. And there's a star on the hood. It's an American Jeep. We were saved. We pulled down. We climbed down out of the hayloft, rolled down the alleyway. I was a little delusional by that point. I was not able really to talk much. But it was the third, we were the 3rd Armored Infantry of Patton's 3rd Army. We were the first Americans they had come across. They tried to feed us. I gagged. I couldn't take any food. They took me to a field hospital, similar to MASH, the program that's still on television today, very similar. They cut off the bottom of my foot. I had trench foot and frostbite both. Then I took to the First General Hospital in Liège, Belgium, then to the First General Hospital in Paris, France. I have no recollection of how I got to either. I was really, as I say, almost out of it at that point. And spent a month overseas in hospitals, eventually put into a hospital plane, flown over the Atlantic to hospital, Staten Island, the Halloran General Hospital. And I was back home, spent another 9 months, all total 10 months, and staying awake many nights.
Robert, we're out of time. I can't believe it. But I just thank you so much for your service.
But that gave you the essence, really.
Unbelievable story, and all of our viewers, thank you. And this is Mike saying good night to you, and especially